Hi everybody, my name is Pat Jennings. I'm with the Murrieta Valley Historical Society. Today we're doing a virtual tour of the Murrieta Museum, so come on in and we'll get started. The history in Murrieta Valley goes back basically millions of years. So we have a selection of exhibits in this part of the museum that deals with basically Murrieta's prehistoric history. Though there were no dinosaurs in Murrieta, we did have what they call Ice Age megafauna. The Ice Age in this area ended about 12,000 years ago and could run back as far as 1.5 to 2.5 million years. So in our exhibit we have a Pleistocene era horse jaw that could be anywhere from 11 or 12,000 years old all the way back to a million years or longer. Found in Murrieta, along with a representation of two teeth. One's a mastodon, the other one's a mammoth tooth, that were found also in the local area. Also in our cabinet here we have some natural history items, some of them from here, some of them from not from around here. But there's shells, there's bones, feathers, fossils, and all kinds of stuff. So when you get a chance to come into the museum after COVID-19 is finally done, you can get an idea of some of the natural history stuff. Like I said, it runs back, this was way back in Murrieta's prehistory. So we'll move on to the next section, which is the Murrieta's first settlers, or the Native Americans. They could have just as easily been in Murrieta for 10, 11, 12,000 years or longer. We have a small exhibit here of some of the items found locally. So some of the grinding stones and some of the things that they would have used to basically maintain their daily life. We have a piece of Tizon brownware pottery that was found down in the Temecula area. An example of the type of pottery they made, plus an example of some of their basketry. This exhibit here also covers the Native American milling stones. So these were their food processors. So they processed acorns, other hard seeds, and cattails, and maybe even small animals on these. They were basically their universal food processor. So as we'll talk more in depth in some of the later videos about how Murrieta came into existence, Murrieta was basically from 1885 until about the 1980s a farming community. So in this particular exhibit, and this one over here, we cover the items of Murrieta's farming history. It was dryland farming, mainly oats, wheat, barley, with irrigation for some row crops, melons and squash, and then orchards and stuff like that. But mainly dryland farming was the main way that everything was grown out here. So a little bit more over here, some other smaller exhibits, mainly the AK Small safe from the AK Small store. Those of you familiar with downtown Murrieta that know the Vista Donuts, this safe was in that store when it was the AK Small store. A small exhibit here covers some quilts and some other handiwork that women would have made back in those days. Nothing went to waste, so they would make quilts and blankets out of them. A little short section here on Temecula Hot Springs, which was another hot spring style resort due west of Gunther's Murrieta Hot Springs. This section covers Gunther's Murrieta Hot Springs. Before Gunther's bought it in 1902, it was well known by the Native Americans for the type of habitat and resources that hot springs would provide. Went through a couple smaller owners, and then 1902 Fritz Gunther bought it and turned it into a world-class health resort. The family sold it in 1970 to an outfit from San Diego who used Teamsters money to further develop it, and then went through a couple owners after that, and then finally it was purchased by Calvary Chapel and turned into a Bible studies and a conference center. They still own it today and have done a great job in restoring a lot of their buildings and stuff that have become part of their conference center. A couple little smaller exhibits over here. Murrieta only had one mine where they mined anything out of the ground, That was silica. It was out on the northeast corner of town. They would mine silica, which is a high grade of quartz. They would haul it into town and ship it on the railway up to LA, where it was used for glazing on pottery and tile. Another interesting exhibit is a treadle or a foot-powered sewing machine. Was used by Jesse Sotelo, a longtime resident of Murrieta, in a sewing factory in Elsinore during World War II to make clothes. The next exhibit we have on this side of the building is for the Murrieta Fire Department. Murrieta Fire Department came into existence in 1947, still existence today. The first year was all volunteer. They ran 3 calls that year. In 2020, they're serving the community or the city of Murrieta out of 5 fire stations and an administrative building. They'll probably run over 10,000 calls this year. The department was volunteer up until 1986, 87, when, due to development, enough tax base was generated to start hiring full-time crews. They rebranded in 2017 after their accreditation. They're now called Murrieta Fire and Rescue. They're technically a fire protection district that is subsidiary to the city of Murrieta. Which brings us to the next exhibit, which was Murrieta Cityhood. Murrieta became a city on July 1st, 1991, after a 2 or 2.5 year incorporation drive by Murrieta Citizens for Cityhood. They elected a city council, and this July 1st will mark the city's 30th anniversary. In the past 30 years, they've added a police force, a senior center, a library, a police department, all kinds of amenities that a modern city could expect. From the 1950s through the late 1970s, early 1980s, Murrieta was known as the Kentucky of the West. And what that means, the other big industry in Murrieta, as farming was going on, was the raising of thoroughbred racehorses. So the horse breeders were attracted to Murrieta for the price of land and a lot of water, because you need a lot of water for pasture. So they moved their horse breeding ranches out here and bred thoroughbreds for all the racetracks around Southern California, and even some that went as far back as to Kentucky, to the Kentucky Derby. Murrieta definitely had a horse culture even then. A bunch of different gymkhanas and a bunch of different horse events used to go on here. It was a horse-based culture. Currently where the Murrieta Museum is, just to the east of us here, is the ball fields. Well, back in the day, those were gymkhana arenas because horses were more popular than some of the sports. Also on display in this part of the museum is items related to the equestrian culture, some saddle, a pack saddle, and branding irons and stuff that are normally affiliated with a ranch of that type. Also, we have some other historical items, stuff from Murrieta Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, the 4-H members, the Murrieta Garden Club, and the Murrieta Lions Club. So kind of a combination horse ranches and some of the civic groups that are, in fact, still around here in Murrieta. This particular case, in 2016, the Murrieta Valley Historical Society had the opportunity to work with the Byzanzen family to help clean up 2 historic structures in Murrieta, the grounds up Murrieta Ray's Cafe and the historic Lakeman House. So as we helped the family clean up, we came into possession of multiple historical artifacts that affect the history of Murrieta. The big thing with Ray, who purchased Ray's Murrieta Cafe in 1950 from the Eiler family, he was a big band guy. He had his own big bands, and he was a composer, a musician. He worked at the Hot Springs in the 1940s as a waiter, but also doubled in as part of their band in the evenings. The section over here, different stuff from different parts of the community that people have donated to the museum. This section here deals with Murrieta Elementary School and the stuff we used to be able to take to school to entertain ourselves basically at recesses and lunchtime, as long as we didn't get too much trouble. So that's what's covered here, along with some of the history of Murrieta Elementary School that's covered in this other case. The case here in the center deals with Murrieta's veterans. Murrieta has a rich history of of service to the country, going back to some veterans buried in Laurel Cemetery from probably the Civil War and the Spanish-American War. So these represent just a few of the veterans we have here in Murrieta. The case over here, like I said, has some stuff about Murrieta Elementary School, some historical documents from the train depot, some railroad trackage, and some information and artifacts from the Murrieta grain elevator, which was in business from 1918 till in the early 1980s. The grain elevator came into existence because as a dryland farm, they needed to store a lot of grain before it was shipped. So when there was a shortage of grain sacks, the people in Murrieta got together and formed a Murrieta Grain Elevator Company and built a grain elevator. Kind of a landmark. They're pretty common other places, but it's pretty unique to Southwest Riverside County. And lastly, we do some temporary exhibits. This one's put together by the Sykes family and on display from us. The Sykes family came to Murrieta about 1893, and then there's still Sykeses living in the valley today. So just some stuff from their family and their ranching history. So we're almost wrapped up, so we'll take a quick look back here in the archive room. Back here is where we store all our the stuff that's not on display, and we're getting ready to archive, and part of our research center. And we also are building a library where people can come in to study the history of Murrieta. So that's a quick whirlwind tour. Stay tuned. We're going to be putting together a lot more videos, more in depth on some of this stuff. But for right now, thank you for watching.